First of all, I'd like to start off, before I give my presentation, with a survey. I'm going to ask you, and I want a show of hands, if you went to an Adventist church school as a young person. Lovely. How many of you sent your children to the church school? Very good. How many of you have grandchildren at a church school now? Numbers are getting fewer, but it's still lovely to see. Yes, I went to Strathfield. We sent our children to, I call it CCAS, the Central Coast Adventist School. All our grandchildren went to church schools, and now we have 6 great-grandies at church schools. I'm not boasting, but I'm praising God. And so I think we'll be sitting in speech nights and school concerts forever. And I think the great-grandchildren should get a discount. I'll need to speak to someone about that. When Donna and I married, there were 2 things that were important to us. That by the time we had kids, we wanted to be living in the country. And by the time, because we were in Sydney at the time and quite tied up there, and also we wanted to be able to send them to an Adventist school, our kids that is. We had a lot of connections here on the coast, but we were also tied up in Sydney. But we watched with interest as friends up here felt the need for an Adventist school. And I could name a few of those people there was the McCrows, the Dixons, the Winnie Allen, and quite a few of them. I know, I can't think of all their names now, but they were all talking together and really wanted a church school on the coast. They decided to equip a room under the old Gosford Church that was at that time in the centre of Gosford, and then they sent a request to the conference office for a teacher. They requested an experienced, married female teacher. In their wisdom, the powers that be up at the conference sent a freshly graduated, unmarried male by the name of John Hammond. He was incredible. The year was 1959, and there's a picture of him speaking at the school's 50th anniversary about 5 years ago. Actually, 2 of the original students were Sue and Jeff Frew. Sue Dixon she was, and Jeff Frew, and there were a few other names that a lot of you are probably familiar with. The room under the church still became very inadequate, and the search was on for what's next. In the meantime, I remember a very distinguished man, and the Dixon family will remember him, attending the original little old timber church at Erina. He wore a top hat, always, because I always notice these things. He wore a dress coat with tails and a very showy fob watch and chain. Do you know who that was, Betty? It was Mr. Penrose. Mr. Penrose was quite the gentleman on the coast, and he donated 4.2 acres of land at Erina that was classed as semi-rural. So there was our start. There was a beautiful stand of bunya pine trees, and in amongst the scrub was a derelict fibro house that the kids called the haunted house, and dared each other to escape from the playground to see if there are any ghosts up there in the haunted house. If you're in Erina Food Court, you might notice, if you look up, I know it's not a very good photo, but if any of you are familiar with all the historic pictures that are around in the food court, there's actually, there you can see up there the drive-in. There was a drive-in at the top there, and that, an interesting little point about that, when Don was an apprentice in Sydney, he was sent up to work on that drive-in, doing the plumbing on it as an apprentice. So sort of things come round in circles. Anyway, it later closed because Erina Fair took over the land, and this photo, that one, I've outlined in red where our school property was. Quite close to the main road. There was a little dirt road coming into the, I'm pointing up there, I should be pointing up there, silly me. And then years later, at a board meeting, Lynn Sutton and I got our heads together and suggested to the board that we submit to council that the road be named Penrose Crescent. John Hammond was still the teacher there, and he did an unforgettable job in setting up the school in a little 2-room building. And that's it. That was a while later when our youngest started school. That's the only photo I could find. It was about this time that we could make our move and move up here. At that time, the coast was blessed with quite a few retired ministers and gardeners, so a vegetable garden was prepared and became very much a part of the curriculum, with these godly men actively interacting with the kids. Only just the other day, one of my kids, aged nearly 60 now, commented out of the blue on how she liked talking with old Pastor Keith. If you remember, Pastor J.P. Keith was quite the gentleman. One of my memories is that after I'd prepared a meal for my large family, one of my kids would go and pull out of their school bag a crushed, wilted spinach leaf that they had grown, and I would have to cook it especially for them. As time went on and numbers grew, there was a need to start the high school. So Graham Allen and other builders volunteered and built this little 6-room, I think I counted up, I think there were 6 rooms in it, building, and that's where the haunted house once stood. Very humble compared with the buildings on that block now. There were many fundraising over the years, like this pet show. And there we see the pet show in full bloom. We had a very auspicious judge judging the pets, and he judged them with great authority. You would know this little girl, that's Rochelle Cosmire. And this one, he got Timmy Hawkins, some of you will remember him, he got the prize for the pet that looked the most like its owner. Also, there was decorated bike competitions. We had a lot of extracurricular fun in those days. I must mention a bit of history about the Naomi Frew Hall. We had a lot of beautiful, precious young people on the coast. The school was definitely a draw card for many families to move there. So one Saturday night, a group of passionate families met in the East Gosford Progress Hall to discuss the need for a hall that the school could use and that the youth could use out of school hours as well. Some of the speakers, I remember Joe Chapman and Audrey Ogg and my Don. There were a few more speakers, but I can't remember who they are. But I remember that there was a lot of folk there and the logistics were grappled with. Then, as the meeting was winding up, Doug and Joan Frew stood up to speak. Just recently, their beautiful daughter, Naomi, had tragically died. Naomi had just finished school and been working to accumulate some funds because she wanted to go to Avondale. Doug and Joan pledged her savings to start the fund for this hall, and it brings tears to my eyes when I think about that moment. I'll never forget it. Doug and Joan pledged their savings, and I remember a lot of people donating big money. There was one lady in particular that some of you might remember, Pearl Augustinson. She was very, very generous, but she donated to the fund an very old-fashioned pedal organ, and Don had the task of selling that organ to put the money into the kitty for the hall. As the plans were drawn up, Don insisted that the hall size be adequate to contain an Olympic-sized basketball court. As a result, there were many Saturday nights and sometimes weeknights that our kids and dads and sometimes mums spent playing basketball, using excess energy, eating pizzas and bonding with mates. When we moved up from Sydney, the headmaster at the time was Kelvin Taylor. I knew his wife, Lorraine, from Strathfield days, and as was the way then, she was doing the headmaster's wife's thing, and teaching the handful of girls in the high school sewing, even though on her own admission, she didn't know a thing about it. She grabbed me and conned me into coming in on a voluntary basis to teach the girls sewing. So I brought my baby, who was Belinda, and put her in a playpen in the corner of the room and had a happy time playing with the girls. They were more like my kids than students. As the numbers of students grew, I was on a steep learning curve because I was put on the staff as a textiles and design plus home economics teacher, and I had that role for about 10 years. One of my favourite success stories is a student named Melissa. I think all of you will know our dear friend Mary Black, who's not very well at the moment, and I know she watches church on her TV, so hi there, Mary. Melissa is Mary's daughter, and she became a model student and ended up studying T&D and home ec and has been teaching at the school for years and is still there. As a teacher, that sort of thing gives you a buzz. To see the campus today, if you have known the past, is just mind-blowing. I wish I had a drone so that I could take aerial photos of it to show you, but I'm sure you're all familiar with the progress that is there now, and at the moment there's big cranes there building a great big 3-storey building, and I feel so proud as I drive down past that school every time. God has blessed our school abundantly, and I want to thank him and praise him for giving me the opportunity to have a little corner in its growth and development. Thank you.